I have a few questions. The first one is for Dr. Berger. It's kind of a question about your question to President. You said that embryonic stem cells get thrown out. How long after they're obtained are they thrown out? At what rate are they being thrown out? Could you just elaborate a little bit more on?
I think Rick can probably do a better job on that since that's more of his area.
Okay. Well, after IVF, embryos are implanted, and what are left over are frozen, and they have a finite lifespan. You can't thaw them out after 15 or 20 years and have a viable embryo. So they have a finite lifespan frozen.
How long?
I believe it's under 10 years. So you have that cutoff there. I don't know the rate at which they're thrown out, but if you think about all of the IVF that goes on in the United States, and you figure that perhaps 20 eggs are harvested and fertilized, and 2 or 3 are implanted, you do the math, and then if you have 10 years to use them, you have basically then stuff that's no longer useful that's being discarded, and the patient can also choose to have their leftover embryos destroyed rather than pay for the maintenance. So it's quite a nice supply of embryos that would be useful.
Millions? Thousands?
I don't know, but if you think about, say it were 1,000 families per state times 50 times 20 minus 3, it's a pretty good supply. It would keep us in scientific research indefinitely. So, and the question that Dr. Berger was asking, which I believe we got close to an answer, but it's just sort of a matter of how the gentleman perceived the question. What we're really asking is, if you have the supply of embryos, and no matter what your value system, how do you distinguish between it being more morally acceptable to allow something to die frozen, be incinerated, that's what happens to medical waste, or be used for scientific research? And remember, scientific research is conducted under a strict set of guidelines and restrictions. So he said that in vitro fertilization might be the wild, wild west of medicine, but embryonic stem cell research is not the wild, wild west. There are very strict guidelines if you want public funding that you have to adhere to, and you have folks come in to make sure that you are adherent to it. So the moral question is, which is the most moral? Medical waste, death over ice, or use for scientific
Or another way,
research.
the question I pose to myself is there an ethical difference between throwing it away and using it for research? Is there a moral distinction there? I personally don't see one. But and my guess is, and I could be wrong, that since the in vitro fertilization is such an unregulated area, probably nobody knows how many are out there. We probably don't have a good handle on that number anywhere because there's so little regulation. Nobody's watching.
Yeah.
I'm sure. I was going to say, I'm sure if you wanted to estimate that number, you just go by. There's got to be some website out there that has number of people getting IVF, and then you multiply that. They get about 20 eggs per couple, and then they take like 3, 4, 5. That's a lot of leftovers.
And they're just burned? Mm-hmm. And the cost of, is it simply lighting a fire? I mean, what are...
No, all medical waste has to be handled as within strict guidelines, and it goes to companies whose expertise is sanitary and safe handling of medical waste, whether that's lipoaspirate or a limb that's been amputated or a frozen embryo. I mean, it's all medical waste, and it's all handled in a very highly regulated way, and it's all accounted for. But at the end, it's all medical waste.
Who's paying for them to handle that waste?
It depends upon, for an IVF clinic, it would be part of their, one of their expenses just to have that handled. We have waste that's biological waste, and our university pays to have that handled and disposed of properly. So it's a pretty big industry.
And one of the ways we have to handle biological waste, I don't know if they do this for that, is the first thing we do is we put them in a high-pressure steam autoclave to sterilize them. That's the first thing. They won't take, the companies will not take biological waste unless it's been autoclaved. And I'm guessing they do the same
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Kind of a two-part question. One, so just to make sure I'm clear, the frozen embryos that are no longer viable, you're saying, that's probably like the best source right now of embryonic stem cells?
Embryos that are frozen and still are viable.
Oh, still
would
are.
be, would be a good source.
Okay, still viable, but probably won't be used.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So part two of that question then, someone goes for in vitro fertilization, goes to a clinic or whatever health provider for that. There's no mechanism there as far as having them sign something saying, okay, at the point where these embryos are not going to be used, for what we intended them for, would you sign off on letting them go to research? Is that?
The policy, I hate to answer all the questions, but I have an answer, and that is that there is no set policy about the various clinics having a standard operating procedure. What I will tell you is that no embryos are donated for scientific research without informed consent. So both parties, meaning the sperm donor and the egg donor, have to sign off. They sign a release releasing those embryos for medical research. It's not a side industry of the IVF clinic.
Right.
No medical material can be transferred without informed consent.
Wouldn't it make sense to try to put a mechanism in place so it could be, and to kind of fast track?
But keep in mind one other thing. The Bush administration restrictions was on publicly funded, like NIH-funded projects. The private sector in this country is not prohibited from taking embryos and making embryonic stem cells. And that's why, like for instance, the state of California put a huge amount of money into and privatize their research capabilities in embryonic stem cells. So you have to keep in mind, this is for publicly funded research. That's what the restriction applies to. The private sector can still do
Right, but
what they want
I'm
to do.
guessing that a lot in the private sector don't, just the same, because then you might not have a lack of embryonic stem cells to work with.
That's right. That's why some states, like California is one, I think there's a
$3
few others that
billion
put huge
over 10
money into
years.
this.
So is there, what would be, say you're kings and queens for a day, you get to, wave your hand and fix the problem, fast track. What would be the best way to start doing that?
I don't think I'll ever be king for a day, and it's
Nor will you be queen for a
well, there you go.
Never say never.
Stem cells, and that's an uncomfortable question to answer because I don't think it's for one person to decide. But if this turned out that this were my planet, I think that your idea is a really good one. And that is, when folks come in for IVF, there could be a standard form which asks how they would prefer that extra embryos be disposed of, and donating them with consent to federal research, stem cell research, under a set of reasonable guidelines would be a terrific way to make those cells available. But let's not forget that adult stem cells are also a perfectly reasonable stem cell category to be working with in parallel. So there could also be more structured ways for folks to donate or save or harvest postnatal stem cells as well.
And that would be
repository.
consistent. Oh.